aperture, f-stop, really kind of the same thing? The bottom line is every photographer, every time they shoot, has to ask themselves the same question. What the F? Have you really thought about the why, the artistic why you do it? Let's get some coffee, of course, French roast, and kick off the discussion. Let's start at the beginning. What are you actually doing when you change the aperture in your camera? For this discussion, I have the perfect victim. It is the old Pentax manual lens that I really like. These are some still good lenses, but it's perfect for demonstration because when you turn the aperture ring, you can actually see the iris open and close. So what's the relationship between changing the f-stop and the iris? Here we go. As you see, when you turn the ring, the smaller numbers indicate a more open f-stop, where the hole in the iris is actually pretty much wide open for f1.2. For a stop like f16 or f22, it's almost like a pinhole in the middle of the iris. So for the deeper stops, you're using the very center of the lens. For the shallow stops, you're using the entire lens, which is why aberration frequently creeps into wide open shots. So that's the technical bit. But what you really care about is what happens artistically when you make these different choices, right? So visually, when you have a shallow f-stop, you have a very thin slice of focus from front to back, meaning to and from your lens. If I had a shallow stop focused on my eye, it may only be focused from the tip of my nose to the back of my ear. In fact, it may be shallower than that. So in this shot is actually that example where you can see focus was on my eye and the back of my ear is soft. And now this is wide open on the lens at 1.4. This is an extreme example, you can see. The fun part is the longer your focal length, the more pronounced this effect is going to be. So this was a 50mm lens in this example. If I were using a 100mm lens, it would be even less, maybe a half. So you really have to decide artistically, is this the look you want? Because when you see the full-size version of this image, that background is awfully soft. Now it does isolate me from the background, but it does so pretty extremely. So artistically, again, always to taste, you have to decide where you want to fall in this spectrum. Artistic choice, that's why you're here, right? For this video, I'm going to stick to photos of people, portraits. It's what I do. Okay, so let's revisit that last example one more time. Let's look at a deep focus f11 shot. Same image, almost the same pose, but you get the idea. The background is now in painful focus. It's not a background you would choose, or I would choose, for a portrait, but it illustrates the point. Even though the previous example was very soft, too soft, this one's painfully harsh, right? So again, artistic choices. Technically, you can do either one you want. The question is, why? Why are you choosing the stop? Okay, you got to ask some questions to make your artistic choices, right? I'm going to ask one that you may not have thought of. What device do you think that your image is going to be seen on? Ever thought about that? Do you deliberately decide on that before you shoot? As a portrait photographer, I know exactly what I'm shooting for. I'm shooting for the big wall portrait. So all of my creative choices for my business are with that in mind. But you may not be doing that. I just hope that you aren't only shooting for this. Tell me you're not just shooting for phone. You're better than that, right? Look what happens to images on a phone. It's called the endless scroll. You get buried in the millions of other images that are on your phone, out in the world, on the internet. You're better than this. Okay, let's assume you are actually printing your work. Let's assume that it may get to the wall. So let's talk about the differences between very shallow and very deep focus or depth of field. From painful experience, I can tell you that if you have an individual shot like I just showed you, for instance, of me in very shallow focus, you really don't want to blow it up to like 40 inches and put it on a wall, because you will experience a very strange disorientation. The head will be very large and the background will be very blurry. It's sort of a psychedelic experience. However, you will want to isolate somewhat on a background that you don't like or that isn't very attractive. So there is some need for softening of the background. But again, if you know that you're going for a large wall portrait, you have to choose or have some experience with what level of softening is going to be acceptable. I did this, the reason I keep saying this is I did this once and my family still jokes about this portrait. We call it the giant head of my granddaughter. We all make mistakes when we first start, guys, and you have to laugh and realize that, boy, does it teach you a lesson. Okay, let's go to the other extreme now. Let's look at a photo or portrait where the background is a major player in the story of the portrait. I'm going to show an example here that was shot at a local performing arts venue that I can't imagine how this would have the same impact at all if you didn't see this background in somewhat sharp focus. Right? It doesn't mean it has to be shot at f/22, but man, you really have to take into account that the environment that this portrait is shot in is really a huge part of the story of the portrait. And you do want deeper stops for this, right? So once again, not necessarily stop down, but you got to practice a little bit, try some different stops, get some feel for the balance between the background and the subject. Because while this background is very important to this portrait, it's still a portrait. Okay, let's talk about another photographic situation you might find yourself in. You're shooting a group or a family. Might be a little rude to have one family member's eyes in focus and everybody else kind of blurry. Just saying. The family members might not like that a whole lot. So you have to then realize that depth of field, your f-stop choice, is not totally in your control in order to capture the subject properly. You still have to use it, you still have to take it into account, and you still have to make a creative choice with it, but you don't have the latitude you would like maybe with a group. You have to get them all in focus, or in my case, there won't be a portrait purchase. That would be a bad day. But if for your own family, family fights are no fun. Get everybody in focus. These are just a few of the creative choices with f-stops. Practice, experiment, do things that are ugly, do things that are beautiful. You'll learn and you'll really have a good answer for what the F? Until the next video, guys. Cheers. My God, did I really drink a whole cup of coffee for this video? I didn't think it was that long. Maybe we can start it over. Maybe I can make another cup of coffee and do a whole video. Nobody would